Imagine this, a man who gave everything, his wealth, his power, his very soul, to those he loved most, only to lose himself completely. Does that sound like a tragedy? Or does it sound familiar? There's an ache in every parent's heart, isn't there? That deep, unshakable desire to give your children the world. But what happens when giving too much becomes taking too little for yourself? When love turns into sacrifice, and sacrifice turns into ruin. This is the story of King Lear, a king, a father, a man whose generosity became his downfall. Let me take you back to a time long before ours, where kingdoms were carved out of ambition and loyalty was as fragile as glass. In the heart of Britain stood Lear, a ruler whose crown gleamed brighter than the sun but whose wisdom had grown dim with age. He decides to divide his kingdom among his 3 daughters, Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia. His condition? Each must declare their love for him in front of the court. It's not just a test, it's a spectacle. And we all know how dangerous spectacles can be. The first 2 daughters, Goneril and Regan, step forward with honey tongues. "Father," they say, "you are the air I breathe, the stars above me, the earth beneath my feet." Their words drip with flattery, so sweet it almost feels sticky. Lear beams with pride. He gives them everything, the land, the riches, the power. But then comes Cordelia, his youngest, his favorite. She looks at her father, not with fear or greed, but with honesty. "I love you," she says simply, "as much as a daughter should love her father. No more, no less." Lear freezes. The room falls silent. Her truth cuts through the lies like a blade. Enraged, he disowns her on the spot, banishing her from the kingdom. And just like that, the foundation of his life begins to crumble. Now, let's pause here because this moment, it's not just about Lear. It's about us. How often do we crave validation over authenticity? How many times have we chosen empty praise over genuine connection? Think about your own life. Have you ever stayed silent when someone needed to hear the truth? Or worse, have you punished someone for speaking it? As Lear hands over his kingdom, he thinks he's secured his legacy. But soon, Goneril and Regan reveal their true colors. They strip him of his knights, his dignity, even his shelter. One stormy night, abandoned by everyone, even his own flesh and blood, he finds himself alone on a desolate heath, screaming into the wind. "I am a man more sinned against than sinning," he cries. And yet, deep down, he knows the truth. His mistakes weren't accidents, they were choices. Choices driven by ego, pride, and misplaced trust. Meanwhile, Cordelia returns. Not for revenge, but for redemption. She leads an army to save her father, risking everything to bring him back from the brink. For a fleeting moment, hope flickers again. Father and daughter reconcile, clinging to each other like lifelines. But Shakespeare doesn't let us off easy. Tragedy strikes once more, leaving Lear cradling Cordelia's lifeless body in his arms. "Howl, howl, howl," he wails, a broken man consumed by grief. By the end, he has nothing. Not his kingdom, not his family, not even his sanity. What stays with you after this story? Is it the betrayal? The madness? Or is it something deeper, an unsettling reflection of our own lives? Here's the thing, Lear's tragedy isn't unique to kings. It's universal. We see pieces of ourselves in him, the parts that want to be loved, admired, needed. We see our fears, the fear of being forgotten, of losing control, of standing empty-handed despite giving everything away. And we see our potential for redemption, if only we're brave enough to face the truth. Let's dive deeper into the heart of this story, shall we? Because while King Lear is a tale of tragedy, it's also a mirror, one that forces us to confront the most uncomfortable truths about love, power, and identity. And if there's one thing I've learned from studying human behavior, it's this: discomfort is where growth begins. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible? Like no matter how much you give, how hard you try, your efforts are overlooked or taken for granted. That's exactly what happens to Lear. He starts as a man who commands armies, rules kingdoms, and expects absolute obedience. But by the end, he's reduced to nothing. a frail old man wandering in the rain, stripped of his title, his authority, even his sense of self. This descent doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow unraveling, piece by piece. First, he loses his crown, the symbol of his power. Then he loses his daughter's loyalty, the illusion of love. Finally, he loses his mind, the very essence of who he is. Shakespeare shows us that when we tie our worth to external things, wealth, status, validation, we set ourselves up for destruction. Because those things can be taken away. And when they are, what's left? But here's the twist. Lear isn't the only tragic figure in this story. There's another character whose journey mirrors his own, Edmund, the illegitimate son of Gloucester. Edmund is everything Lear is not: young, cunning, ambitious. He resents being labeled a bastard and decides to carve out his own destiny through deceit and manipulation. He tricks his father into believing his legitimate brother Edgar is plotting against him, leading to Edgar's exile. At first glance, Edmund seems like the villain, doesn't he? The schemer, the liar, the destroyer of families. But look closer. Isn't he just another victim of circumstance? Born on the wrong side of legitimacy, denied the privileges his brother enjoys, he claws his way up using whatever tools he has. His famous soliloquy says it all. Thou, nature, art my goddess, to thy law/my services are bound. For Edmund, survival means playing by nature's brutal rules, where might makes right, and morality is a luxury he can't afford. What's fascinating is how Shakespeare juxtaposes these two characters. On one hand, you have Lear, an aging king clinging to the past, blinded by pride and tradition. On the other, you have Edmund, a young opportunist embracing the chaos of the present, unburdened by guilt or loyalty. They represent two extremes of human nature, the rigidity of age versus the recklessness of youth. Together, they paint a picture of humanity in all its complexity. But the parallels don't stop there. Just as Lear banishes Cordelia for speaking the truth, Gloucester casts out Edgar based on lies. Both fathers make catastrophic mistakes, driven by misplaced trust and flawed judgment. And both pay dearly for it. Gloucester loses his eyesight, literally and metaphorically, as punishment for failing to see the truth. It's only after he's blinded that he gains clarity, realizing too late the depth of Edgar's love and Edmund's betrayal. This theme of blindness runs throughout the play. Physical blindness, emotional blindness, moral blindness, it's everywhere. Characters stumble through the darkness, unable or unwilling to confront reality. Even Lear, in his madness, sees more clearly than he ever did before. Stripped of his illusions, he finally understands the suffering of others. Poor naked wretches, wheresoever you are, he says, acknowledging the plight of those less fortunate. In losing everything, he finds compassion. And then there's the storm, the literal tempest that rages outside, mirroring the turmoil within Lear's mind. Storms are cleansing, aren't they? They wash away the dirt, the debris, the clutter. But they're also destructive. They leave scars. For Lear, the storm becomes a turning point. Out there on the heath, drenched and shivering, he sheds the trappings of kingship and confronts his raw humanity. He asks questions that haunt us all. Who am I without my roles, my titles, my possessions? Am I still worthy of love? Of respect? These are heavy questions, but they're necessary ones. Because sooner or later, life will strip us down to our core. We'll lose jobs, relationships, dreams. Maybe not all at once, but bit by bit, until we're forced to reckon with who we really are. The question is, will we face that reckoning with courage? Or will we cling to the wreckage, refusing to let go? By now, you might be wondering, is redemption possible? Can someone like Lear, or Gloucester, or any of us, find peace after such profound loss? Well, the answer lies in Cordelia. She represents grace, forgiveness, unconditional love. When she returns to save her father, she doesn't do it for glory or revenge. She does it because it's the right thing to do. Her actions remind us that true strength isn't about holding on to power, it's about letting go. Letting go of anger, resentment, fear. Choosing love over bitterness, connection over isolation. Of course, Shakespeare being Shakespeare, He doesn't give us a happy ending. Cordelia dies, Lear collapses in despair, and the stage is littered with bodies. But even in the midst of devastation, there's a glimmer of hope. Edgar, the wronged son, survives. He takes on the mantle of leadership, vowing to restore order to the fractured kingdom. His final lines echo with determination. The weight of this sad time we must obey, speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. Isn't that beautiful? Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. It's a call to authenticity, to vulnerability, to living fully and honestly. And perhaps that's the real lesson of King Lear. True power doesn't come from ruling others. It comes from ruling yourself. From facing your flaws, owning your mistakes, and finding the courage to start again. Let's talk about endings. Not the kind that tie everything up neatly with a bow, but the messy, raw, achingly human ones. The kind that linger long after the curtain falls. Because in King Lear, Shakespeare doesn't just tell a story, he breaks open the human soul and lays it bare for us to examine. And what we find there isn't always pretty. By now, you've seen how Lear's journey spirals downward into chaos, how his choices unravel his world until nothing remains but grief and regret. But let's zoom out for a moment. What does this tragedy mean for us? Why has this play endured for centuries, resonating across cultures, time periods, and personal experiences? The answer lies not in its despair, but in its lessons, a roadmap of sorts for navigating our own lives. Let's revisit Lear's final moments, shall we? Picture him cradling Cordelia's lifeless body, his voice trembling as he begs her to breathe again. Do you see this? Look on her. Look, her lips, look there, he cries, before collapsing in anguish. It's one of the most devastating scenes ever written, not because of what happens, but because of what could have been. If only Lear hadn't banished her. If only he'd listened. If only he'd loved differently. Here's the hard truth. We all carry what-ifs like scars. Regrets over words left unsaid, actions unspoken, bridges burned beyond repair. But Lear's story reminds us that regret isn't permanent unless we allow it to be. Redemption is possible, but it requires humility. Facing the pain head-on. Admitting when we're wrong. And sometimes, it requires forgiveness, not from others, but from ourselves. Now, let's shift gears for a moment. Remember Edmund? The cunning, ruthless, illegitimate son who thrives on deception? His arc might seem like pure villainy at first glance, but scratch beneath the surface and you'll find something else: vulnerability. In his dying moments, mortally wounded by his brother Edgar, Edmund reveals a flicker of humanity. "Some good I mean to do," he says, renouncing his schemes and attempting to save Lear and Cordelia. It's too late, of course. The damage is done. But here's what fascinates me about this moment. Even someone as morally bankrupt as Edmund can change. Can choose light over darkness, even if it's fleeting. Isn't that hopeful? It tells us that no matter how far we stray, no matter how many mistakes we make, there's always room for transformation. Always a chance to rewrite our ending. And then there's Gloucester, whose physical blindness becomes a metaphor for spiritual awakening. After being betrayed by Edmund and betrayed again by fate itself, Gloucester reaches rock bottom. He tries to end his life, jumping off a cliff, or so he thinks. Spoiler alert, he survives. When Edgar reveals the truth, that Gloucester was tricked into believing he fell, he delivers one of the play's most profound lines: "Ripeness is all." What does that mean? Ripeness isn't perfection. It's readiness, acceptance, understanding that life isn't about avoiding pain, it's about embracing it, learning from it, growing through it. Gloucester may never regain his sight, but he gains something far more valuable: perspective. A deeper understanding of himself and the world around him. This theme of ripeness extends to every character in the play, and perhaps to each of us as well. Are we ready to face our truths? To shed the illusions we cling to, whether they're about love, power, or identity? Are we willing to embrace the storms of life, knowing they'll wash away parts of us, but also reveal new layers beneath? Let's bring it back to Lear for a moment. Think about his transformation. At the beginning of the play, he's arrogant, self-centered, obsessed with appearances. By the end, he's humbled, broken, stripped of everything except his humanity. And yet, in that state of utter vulnerability, he finds connection. Compassion. Yes, it comes too late to save him, but isn't that often the way with life? We learn our greatest lessons when it feels like there's no time left to apply them. But here's the thing, it's never truly too late. Sure, Lear loses Cordelia, but in losing her, he gains clarity. He learns what real love looks like, not the flattery of Goneril and Regan, but the quiet, steadfast devotion of Cordelia. He learns that true strength isn't about control, it's about surrender. Surrendering to love, to loss, to the inevitable passage of time. And isn't that the ultimate lesson of King Lear? That life is unpredictable, unfair, heartbreaking, and beautiful precisely because of those things. That we can't control everything, no matter how hard we try. That the people we push away are often the ones who love us most. And that sometimes, the only way forward is to let go. So where does that leave us? How do we take these timeless themes and apply them to our modern lives? Let me share something personal with you. A few years ago, I found myself standing at my own crossroads. Like Lear, I had poured everything into relationships, career, achievements, only to feel empty when they didn't fill the void inside me. I realized I'd been chasing validation instead of authenticity, performing instead of living. It took hitting rock bottom for me to wake up, to ask myself, who am I without the roles I play? Without the expectations I've placed on myself and others? It wasn't easy. There were days I wanted to give up, nights I cried myself to sleep. But slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. I learned to speak my truth, even when it scared me. To forgive those who hurt me, and myself for hurting others. To embrace imperfection as part of being human. That's why stories like King Lear matter. They remind us that we're not alone. That everyone stumbles, falls, gets lost along the way. But they also show us that redemption is possible, if we're brave enough to seek it. If we're willing to face the storm, knowing it will cleanse as much as it destroys. Which brings me to my final point. This play ends in tragedy, yes, but it's also a call to action. To live fully, love deeply, and lead authentically. To prioritize connection over control, honesty over flattery, substance over spectacle. Because at the end of the day, none of us gets out alive. The question is, how will we spend the time we have? Will we cling to power and pride, or will we choose love and humility? As Edgar says in the closing lines of the play, the weight of this sad time we must obey. Life is heavy, painful, unfair, but it's also rich with meaning, if we're willing to look for it. So speak your truth. Forgive freely. Love fiercely. And remember, rightness is all. Do you want to create a big change in your life but can't seem to find the right path? If yes, then The Self-Made Millionaire, Zero to Wealth is the book that has the power to turn your dreams into reality. When we read this book, it felt like every page was revealing our hidden potential. It holds all the secrets that highly successful people have learned on their journeys. If you want to unlock the true power of your mind and reach the heights of success, then this book is for you. To get it absolutely free, hit subscribe and comment book below right now.